Okay, Shalom Aleichem, Rabotai. Tonight we are going to be discussing a topic which is, I think, one of the first times discussed. Definitely that I have given a shiur on, and it's a topic that is relevant for all edot, but a special emphasis on edat paras. The chabura that meets usually on Thursday will tell you that we have seen many mekorot to minhagi Yisrael, to customs that are rooted in halacha, and these customs are not only customs that are endorsed, but they have strong basis why they are done. Does everyone hear me okay? Or there's too much noise? Okay. But they are customs that there are reasons why we are noheg that way. Now, in 2005, I moved to Westwood from Eretz Yisrael. I had a few students that were from Persian background where I was teaching halacha in Eretz Yisrael, in the yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. So I was familiar a little bit with the Persian customs, but not too much. And when I came to Westwood, I was the Ikar Rosh Kollel of an Ashkenazi Kollel, but there was also a Sephardic minyan. And when you say a Sephardic minyan in Westwood, it means a Persian minyan. As a matter of fact, it was 99% Persian, 1% Moroccan. I was that 1%, and I got familiar with a lot of the customs and a lot of the hanhagot and a lot of the we'll call it culture, for lack of a better word, and it was fascinating. It was fascinating to see the different hanagot, and being that I in 2005 is when I just published my Sefer Magen Avot on Minhagim, the first volume of my Sefer on Minhagim. So I was very involved in this sugya of Minhagim in general, and I was very curious to discover. So what are the Minhagim of the Persians? And nobody was able to answer. I mean, I spoke to the Rabbanim, and people weren't familiar at all. They didn't pay attention. It kind of slipped by the side. It was very strange for me because I came from a community that if you touched any of their minhagim, they'll kill you, literally. And it was to a point that I was like, okay, so why does nobody care? So they told me that, we don't know what was going on. Nobody really had a good answer, and I was frustrated by this. As a matter of fact, they started to compile and put together minhagei paras, and I didn't get so far. I didn't get very far. So I kind of gave up on it. In the meantime, one of the people that prayed in the minyan gave to me a notebook from his grandfather. He was the Dayan of Bedin of Hamadan. And it was writings. And at the time, I had somebody in the kollel that was very talented in being able to transcribe this. His name is Rabbi Ariel Ovadia. He's a Rav of a shul and of a kehila in Lakewood, New Jersey. And he transcribed the whole thing. And I had it sitting in my inbox. Fast forward, in 2010, I moved to Toronto. 2015, I moved back to LA. And in the meantime, I developed a system of publishing sfarim and manuscripts that we were zoche in Machon Magen Avot to publish a bunch of different manuscripts. And they were all Moroccan chachamim from the 1600s, Geonei Olam, one of the uncle of the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, the Rav Avram ben Musa, which was one of the great Acharonim, great Mekubalim, there was Rav Chaim David Serrero, one of the Dayanim of Morocco, and I told myself, the Moroccans have a lot of pride in their Chachamim, and it makes a big difference in the Yirat Shamayim, that you know that you're coming from Shrashim, Tehorim. And when I spoke to the Persian yeshiva Bachrim, I'm in a community in Pico Robertson where where the Eduta Mizrach is the Persians, and most of the Eduta Mizrach are Persian over here, and I never saw them being mishtayech enough to their chachamim, so that bothered me tremendously. So I dug up the manuscript that I had in my inbox, and I saw maybe it would be something that we would be able to print. I have to give credit to Rabbi Ariel Ovadia. He put out a Avkat Rochel, and he put in by the Gnuzot some of those teshuvot that he transcribed, and a lot of Bnei Torah were very interested in that. So that inspired us to print the Sefer. I had a few Balabatim over here that were very supportive and worked a lot. Not only they helped financially make this happen, but they also they also contributed in writing historical stuff. We got a Rabbi Ovadia's brother, Rabbi Michael Ovadia, to write Hagaot and Hearot on the Teshuvot. We got somebody to translate some of the Teshuvot that were in Farsi. It was difficult Farsi, wasn't so simple. And then there's two Talmidei Chachamim in Yerushalayim that I asked. They're originally from LA. At least one of them is originally from LA. His name is Rabbi Yitzchakian. Another one is Rabbi Balanes. Young Talmidei Chachamim who live in Yerushalayim, who were working for a while on Persian Minhagim. I remember them because he used to pray by me in Westwood. And he said he had a kuntaras, and I told him it would be wonderful if we could print that kuntaras in the Sefer. So I gave him a deadline, and they worked diligently on adding on and beefing up the Mikorot. So about a month ago, we printed a Sefer Minage Paras. We printed a Sefer called Piskei Chacham David Sasson Rabban. I don't know if Rabbi Ben Simchon showed you that it's this Piskei Chacham David. Right, there you go. You have it right there. And you'll see all of the psakim from the Dayani, from what went on in Hamadan. And really, the purpose is, number one, to show that there was a proper bedding system that functioned with a proper with proper Talmidei Chachamim that answered Kefi Halacha, Kefi Maran Shulchan Aruch, and Kefi Halacha. So that itself is very important. Number two, you can get a lot of historical background. Number three, we wrote Hakdamot about the different Chachamim that there were in Paras, because nothing was written. Nothing was, as far as I know, was published as a real sefer from Chachmei Paras. There was a little, they tell me, from Rav Shraga, but not in halacha really. We haven't found a sefer halacha. So this is something psakim of the Bedin of Hamadan, not that long ago, and also included is kuntaras or paras, which is minage paras, which is what I want to give a shir on tonight. I am not definitely the authority on minage paras, but I'm coming from a perspective of working on minhagim in general and seeing that it's an amazing thing that most edot in Klal Yisrael, whether they're Sfaradim or Ashkenazim, you go, or Edot HaMizrach, you go way back, you'll see that they have a common denominator, and many of them are very similar. You go through the kuntaras itself after you get the book from Asher. Those of you who are interested, I would highly recommend it. It's a very good book, especially if you're from Persian descent. And you'll read over there in the Hagdama that the obligation halachically for a person to keep his minagim, it's not a nice thing. It's not a nice concept. It's halacha that of a community held of a certain custom, the children and the grandchildren are obligated and are mechuyev to keep that. So it's not something to play around with. And up to a point that there's real issues because some of them are minagim leachmir, and one would need a tarat nedarim if he wants to release himself from such minagim. Let me start with a few of them, and I want to show that the minagim in Klal Yisrael are very similar. Let's start first of all in Daf Mem Aleph of Minage Paras Umikorotem, Ot Yud Daled. The minhag in Paras, and this is also brought in Sefer Magen Avot, the minhag in Paras. Nahagu anashim lekabel shabbat beadlakat nerot, and in Tedvav, we'll go to Tedvav. Nahagu anashim she'achar adlakat nerot mechasot eneim umevarchot. The way that, how many of the tzibur here is Persian? The way that all of your grandmothers lit nerot was that they covered their eyes, and then they made the bracha. That was the minhag, that universal, and it's not only a Persian minhag. This was the minhag by the Sfaradim. This was the minhag by the Ashkenazim. This was the minhag by Edot HaMizrach. The only place, to my knowledge, that this wasn't the minhag was in Teiman, and maybe in one of the communities in Baghdad. As a matter of fact, in the Haskama that Rav Yaakov Chaim Sofer, Rosh Yeshiva Kaf HaChaim, a grandson of the Kaf HaChaim, writes on this kuntaras. He writes the following, page 9 of the Haskama. He brings from someone, actually a Talmid Chacham that I know very well. His name is Rabbi Gavriel Chasson, and he brings that from this research that the minhag of women lighting and then making a bracha was a minhag in Algiers, in Amsterdam, in Afghanistan, in Baghdad, in Bukharia, in Gibraltar and Jerba, in Georgia, in Damascus, in India, in Turkey, in Kurdistan, in Libya, in Morocco, in Egypt, the Portuguese, the Persians, Tunisians, which is, came out everyone. And by the Ashkenazim as well. And the reason is simple. The reason is because the Shitata Bahag is that with Adlakat Nera, when a woman makes a bracha of Leadik Ner Shel Shabbat, the Bahag says she's Mekabelet Shabbat, to a point that the Aruch HaShulchan says that if she says Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Leadik Ner Shel Shabbat, and then she lights, she says Haviki Bracha Levatala. It's as if you're making a bracha levatala. It's an approach that the generations were choshesh for the Bahag, and this is already written in the Kadmonim, the Sefer Niyar of Baalei HaTosfot. This is brought in the Kuntras. They did a very good job on this. And there's been research that there was mamash rishonim, Rav Hai Gaon, Rav Shrira Gaon, minhag kadum meod, very a minhag that's very miyusad, to be choshesh that there's a problem of Kabbalat Shabbat when one makes a bracha. And it's known that in the previous generation, the Gadol by the Sfaradim, Rav Ovadia Yosef, Zchuto Yagen Alenu, is you see, I can tell I'm not dealing with a Moroccan crowd, because if you would say, if I say Zchuto Yagen Alenu, everyone should answer Amen. But I don't know, you guys are not used to that. Okay, so either way, you got to train into that a little. So Rav Ovadia Yosef went on a campaign to change the minhag. He went on a very strong campaign, and at every opportunity that he had, he advocated Shitat Rambam, that you have to make a bracha, and then, because Rambam didn't hold like the Bahag, and then light, and there's many Rishonim that follow that, to a point that he said it's a bracha levatala, the opposite. If you make a bracha afterwards, it's after Avilas Yatan. The problem is in other places, Rav Ovadia Yosef says if you make a bracha after something, it's not a problem of Avilas Yatan, especially if you're osek in the mitzvah, like by mezuzah, by Chanukah. He says that it comes into big problems. Why over here was he so stringent on this? But en achara minhag klum. This was the minhag, just like we say the bracha after netilat yadayim, just like we, when women go to the mikveh, they make the bracha after. I mean, he also wants to change that minhag, and Rav Ovadia Yosef writes in one of his tshuvot, I believe Chelek Tet, that as being the gadol ador, he has the right to change the minhag, but it's obvious when one reads the Teshuvah that was the minhag. The Ben Ish Chai endorses this, the Chida endorses this minhag, and therefore, if somebody who doesn't want to follow minhagim at all, he says, "I don't want to hear from it." He has to ask a question if he's allowed to, but in this area, Dat Maran is not clear in this subject. Maran writes, the Rambam writes, you make the bracha, then you light. Maran deviates from the language of the Rambam. He writes, Keshiyadlik yivarech, the lashon of the Tur. So it's not very clear what Shulchan Aruch holds. The Chida writes, when we're not clear what the Shulchan Aruch holds, we go according to Ikar Halacha. And over here, Ikar Halacha would be the minhag. Either way, he writes, we're not Meshubat Maran, we don't follow Piskei Maran when it's not clear what he said. So over here, somebody would want to follow their minhag, and it's not like I think it's an option. I think people are obligated to follow their minhag, and there's a shitat habahag. Their wives should be lighting and then making a bracha, just like their grandmothers did. If somebody wants to change and he follows Rav Ovadia Yosef lechumra velekula, that means his wife doesn't wear a wig and whatever else he says. Maybe he follows the chumra velekula and he leaves that, but he can't pick and choose. I mean, this is the minhag that's meyusad, and if you look through the sefer, you'll see that this was the overwhelming minhag. Okay, it's a very big discussion. I'm sure you've heard about this discussion before. It's a little bit of a controversial. I don't know why it's so controversial, but it's pretty clear. There was the minhag, there's the bahag. And there's those who say the Rambam's shita, which is not that way. And how to paskin depends if you're gonna follow the minhag or if you're gonna change the minhag and follow the psak of Rav Ovadia Yosef. Zechuto yagen alenu. Amen. Okay. Now, just to have a little bit of an idea. On other psakim, if you take a look at Pesach, it's coming up soon. The Persian Minhagim was to be machmir on Pesach. Halacha Yudchet, Ot Yudchet. Although, according to Maran, Kli Zchuchit eno bolea. Glass is not bolea. As a matter of fact, the Moroccan minhag is to be lenient. Glass is able to be used on Pesach. Nevertheless, the minhag in Paras was to be machmer by kli zchuchit, not to use kli zchuchit on Pesach. And this is a minhag to be machmir. Somebody who wants to be lenient against this minhag has a real question, because if avotenu were machmir on this minhag, so it's a geder and a siyag, and it's the community held that way. It's not so simple. One could be lenient. It's not so simple. Not only kli zechuchit, but you have to know all the other things like noten tam livgab and chozer v'neor. There are some lists that come out on Pesach that are extremely lenient. They say that you could buy this item and that item without a hechsher, because even though it could be that beforehand there was chametz mixed in, but it was chozer v'neor. I mean, before Pesach with the chabura over here, we'll speak about this more at length. But I mean, our grandmothers would shudder if she heard us speaking this way. They would literally smack us. Where we are coming to be lenient to a point and being mezalzel in things. If you take a look, that in Paras they were machmir even in kli zechuchit. Ikar adin should be okay, but they were choshesh for the shitot not that way. I would imagine that all of the other chumrot of making sure things have a hechsher, buying things that don't have a hechsher, was not part of our masoret. As a matter of fact, there was a few years ago there was this issue keeps on resurfacing that all these type of lists come out that are extremely lenient, and there was a letter that was published that was signed by Rav Asher Chachwell, Rav Amram Masayak from Toronto, Chief Rabbi of Toronto previously, now he's in Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi David Sabach, the Chief Rabbi of Quebec, which also he signed on this, and Rabbi Mansour signed on it, other Rabbanim signed on it as well, that basically the nusach that was written was that our masoret is never to be rely on something on Pesach without a hashgacha that is reliable. And people nowadays, they just go, they buy a lot of stuff without hashgacha on Pesach because they rely on all types of tzirufim. Now, that's a difficult masorah. If you want to be tzamud to our approach to Pesach, definitely wasn't that. It's part of a bigger discussion. Okay. Buying things during the Omer. I was always amazed that I never got a question whether you're allowed to drive on Shabbat or not. But those people that were lenient in driving on Shabbat for some reason would always be very, very makpid and always ask me questions in two matters. Number one, ta'anid bechorot. And number two, buying new things during the Omer. That's what I got. Driving was okay, but this not. Obviously, I'm not talking about the frommer people. But what I'm bringing is that even the less religious were very machmir in not buying something new during the Omer. And they obviously got that from the community that there is a machloket about this. For example, the Moroccan minhag was to buy new things during the Omer, no problem. Shelotu Chubot, I believe, Vayomer Meir from Meir Waknin from Tiberia writes that was the minhag. Shulchan Aruch doesn't write a thing about new things during the Omer. You're not allowed to sporet and nisuin. Buying new things during the Omer, it's a problem saying Shechianu. But Shechianu during the Omer is not a problem, it's just during the 3 weeks. Nevertheless, the minhag in Paras was to be machmer, not to buy new things during the Omer. And there are mikorot to this. The Sefer Minhagim Paras brings from Geonim, Rav Shrira Gaon, שגזרו שלא לעשות שמחה בין פסח לעצרת, שלא לעשות כסות חדשה עד שבועות. And there are more recent mikorot from the Sefer Yosef Ometz Yospa that this was the minhag in Frankfurt, it's the minhag in Vermaisia, it's the minhag in Jerba. It was the minhag in some areas like Paras not to buy something new during the Omer. I got questions, are you allowed to buy a radio? Are you allowed to, when they had radios, are you allowed to buy this? Obviously the Yesod is that Mi'ikar Adin, it's mutar, just there, things like clothes, people were machmir. So you'd have to use your own shikul adat. Buying a Ferrari during that time, is that allowed or not? Maybe according to Minhag Paras, one shouldn't buy a very fancy item. Okay. Same thing with getting married during the 3 weeks. Mi'ikar Adin, Shulchan Aruch writes that during the 3 weeks there wouldn't be a problem besides the 9 days. Asur Lisha Isha during the 9 days. Dina di Gemara. But the Sefer HaMeorot writes that they were machmir for 3 weeks. I remember asking this question to Rabbi Shalom Misas, and he said, Mishiribo Nukfo, somebody who worries, shouldn't get married during the 3 weeks. Rav Ovadia was totally lenient, and he pushed it. He said that it should be allowed until Rosh Chodesh. The Persians, as well as many other Sephardic communities, as well as Edut HaMizrach communities, were machmir for the 3 weeks. The Aram Tsova, Teiman, Bavel, the Ben Ish Chai writes in Dvarim. As I mentioned, in Morocco, many people were machmir. So it's not a pele. The Shirot Uchuvot, Rabbi Chaim Mesas, Maim Chaim, Rabbi Yosef Mesas. Rabbi Yosef Mesas was a very interesting posek. He was a phenomenal Talmid Chacham and writer. He had many leniencies. But and there are people that push the agenda that he was very lenient. So I started compiling a list of all his chumrot, like not able to ride a bike on Shabbat and other things. And I say, those people are so lenient. I just want to let you know these are his chumrot. So maybe I'll publish that one day. But here you have that he writes that this was the universal minhag to be machmer for the 3 weeks. So that was a strong Persian minhag as well. As you see, as we're going along, a lot of these Persian minhagim are in line with the rest of Klal Yisrael, where they were machmir. I mean, there were some communities different, like every minhag, but it's not things that are off the beaten track or different. They are in line with most minhagei Yisrael. So it's hard to say that it was minhagei ta'ut or minhagim that nobody paid attention to. These were part and parcel of the hanhagot of Am Yisrael. So to say that, there was no chachamim there, and therefore everybody acted randomly, is not so simple to say. When you see that this is in line with the Ben Ish Chai, who Baghdad had tremendous influence on Iran, and the like. I mean, I'll read to you some of the klalim that I should have said this in the beginning, but in page Yud Chet, the first statement, I have no idea what it means. Beparas kiblu alem li'naheg al pi Rambam. I don't know what that means. Bet beparas kiblu horat Maran Yosef Karo bala bet Yosef ve'Shulchan Aruch ben le'akel ben le'achmir. And you can see in the Teshuvot of Rav David Sasson Rabban, he's always quoting the Shulchan Aruch and other poskim as well. It's brought over here that they held Avorat Maran. It's clear. It's written in also in Dinei Mamonot. We also Minag Paras. The Kaf HaChaim, this very important Kaf HaChaim, I'm sure you've heard it before. Simantaf Lamed Zayin. Ot Yud Bet, Paras, Holchim Achar Minag Bavel. Very similar to Minag Bavel. A lot of the Rabbanim of Paras learned in Bavel, learned in Baghdad, and they came afterwards. Okay, and also in Din Erva, like Gittin and Kiddushin, Machmirim Latzet Kol HaShitot, Av Keshemaran Mekel, Chutz Mimakom Igun, and this is based on the Kaf HaChaim, Lechaora, their nimshach, their nimshach achar minage Bavel, like most things, and most edot are machmir in Gittin and Kiddushin, not like Maran, because b'makom igun, b'makom erva chamura, we weren't making like Maran. We gave a shir about this a few weeks ago, if the Chaver remembers. Okay, getting married during the Sukkah spoke about. Now people are not going to like the next ones, but anything that have to do with the 9 days, once again, people are very lenient nowadays. Say Shavua Shechalbo, and if there's no Shavua Shechalbo, to go around being Mekel Legamre. That wasn't the original minhag. First of all, Tisporet, Rov Are Paras Nagu Leachmir Shelo Listaper Miyud Zayin Tamuz. I mean, I hope you don't regret coming to this shiur, but that was the original minhag for the 3 weeks, not to take a haircut, not to wash in cold, even in cold water for the 9 days. Okay, so nowadays, I think some poskim will tell you that if it's something that's gzeira, that's very difficult to be omed in, at least you do a rachitza of washing off the zeya. But the original minhag was 9 days. In Morocco, they were a little more lenient regarding rachitza. Some places were more lenient. Kibus, they were more machmir than the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch said shabbat shechalbo, 9 days on kibus as well. Obviously, these are chumrot, but and if somebody is not able to do the whole extent of it, and it's very difficult for him, he should find in halacha how he's able to keep the spirit as much as possible. But in Yiddish we would say to machid avek, just not to pay attention to it, is not the right approach. You see that the previous generations were more machmir in avilut of the Bet HaMikdash, was avilut dirabim, which is much more machmir of an avilut than regular avilut. It's not something just to brush aside. Same thing with talit and tefillin on Tisha B'Av. The minhag was not to wear talit and tefillin in the morning of Tisha B'Av, only mincha time. And that's like Maran. Now, there is a community in Bet El that they wore tefillin in the morning, and therefore in Yerushalayim, some places started wearing it. But ma pitom that there should be minyanim in Chutz La'aretz, especially not in Yerushalayim, that should start wearing tefillin, talit and tefillin in the morning. I mean, the Ben Ish Chai writes that he himself will wear tefillin at home before coming to the Bet HaKnesset. But he didn't say, we should change the minhag. Should change the minhag about against Maran. He didn't say that, and that's something that's definitely not the accepted practice. Now, if somebody wears tefillin at home before coming to Bet HaKnesset, that'll depend. If he wants to do bimachmir on things bitzinah, person's always allowed. I don't know if it's called if it's a chumrah that he's allowed to, because maybe there's an isur of wearing tefillin. It's a whole subject. But that birabim, we should just adopt a custom of Bet El in Yerushalayim that we're not mikubalim. I don't know, but what do people do? I don't know. What do people do in Great Neck? Do the synagogues on Tisha B'Av in the morning wear tefillin? What? They now do. It's a pella to me. It's a pella why that would be. The minhag was not that way. The minhag in Paras was not that way, and it's against the Shulchan Aruch. But it's a pella that things should change this way. It's a mindset, I guess. But it's you could read the Sefer and you'll see the different mekorot, and I guess people will. I'm sorry, I can't hear well. No, at home or also in. Who said that? Right, I don't know. I mean, the original minhag was not that way, so we're changing minhagim over here. So it's an interesting thing. Hello? I hear you better now. So it's amazing to me. I don't comprehend that. There are Sfarim like the Eretz Chaim, Rav Chaim Siton, that writes that even according to the Rashash, it only means wearing tefillin at home, but not in the Bet HaKnesset. I remember praying by Rabbi Shalom Misas in Yerushalayim, and he would tell people at night on Tisha B'Av that anybody that comes with tefillin in the morning should leave the shul. You don't usually hear a rabbi saying, leave if you bring tefillin. You hear the other way around. He was very strong in Yerushalayim. I think outside of Yerushalayim, I'd be very interested to hear why Persian Rabbanim would change the custom and say to wear tefillin. It's interesting. Regarding Nachem on Tisha B'Av, here the minhag by the communities, the Sfaradim and Edut HaMizrach, Ot Chaf Hey is to say Nachem on Mincha of Tisha B'Av only, and not to say it in the Gimel Tefillot. Here, this is a minhag like the Rosh. The Rosh, as was spoken about in the Chaburot beforehand, was Rabban Shel Kol Sfaradim. All the Sfaradim accepted the Rosh, and over here, it seems to be that most communities in Am Yisrael followed this opinion. This was the minhag of the Ashkenazim. This was the minhag of Kushta, of Izmir, of Baghdad, like the Gedulat Elisha and the Ben Ishchai, right? Saloniki, Morocco, Jerba, Tunis, Lube, London, Amsterdam. They all write to say Nachem only mincha time. So once again, minhag paras is consistent with minhag Am Yisrael. They had minhag paras regarding having milk after meat was very interesting. I've heard this from many places, that they definitely were more machmir than other kehilot. In Morocco, there was different customs, but the main cities held, like Maran, that after milk, you're allowed to have meat right away. After milk, you're allowed to have meat right away. By the Parsim, it wasn't that way. Some held an hour. Some held 2 hours, some held 3 hours, some held 6 hours. And some held like the Ben Ishchai, that if it's cheese that was aged for a month, you wait an hour, 2 months, 2 hours. And you could see that in Baghdad this was going on as well. So they were more machmir in that regard. So therefore, if somebody has a minhag from his parents, that they were machmir on vina or chalav, which is not something that is not brought in halacha. Those of you want to take a look at the Bet Yosef in Orach Chaim, Siman Kuf, where did it? Kuf Ayin Gimel, Od Bet, Maran Bet Yosef brings from the Zohar Kadosh to be machmir after milk 6 hours, not only cheese, even milk. So most Sfaradim don't follow that. They say you're allowed to have after milk, you're allowed to have meat. But if somebody has a minhag from his parents, you should look into it, what to do about that. I will mention what Rabbi Yashiv told me on a few occasions. Something that's very important here is when you don't know what your minhag is, you could rely on Ikar Adin. So this is one of those things. If you don't know 2 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours, you could rely on Ikar Adin, which is, according to Maran, which is you don't have any hamtana whatsoever. Other things that you know is universal minhag, like Nachem, Mincha time, or Tefillin on Tisha B'Av, that's a universal minhag, that's known. That you should follow your minhag. Okay. What do you mean if they had passat? So I heard from some people that they did 3 hours, which is Rabbeinu Yerucham writes that. Rabbeinu Yerucham writes that, but I don't know. If somebody has that minhag, you can definitely rely on it. The halach, what? So disclaimer, I am not an expert on Persian Minhagim. I don't, here in the kuntaras, it's not brought down. I would say that my purpose over here is to present how Minhagim Paras is reflected compared to other communities. As I'm showing you different minhagim that are the same. I don't know. I don't know the answer to your question. I don't know. Okay. Eating meat during Shiva Yemei Avelut. Now, eating meat after Shiva Yemei Avelut is a during Shiva Yemei Avelut. You have to understand that the Gemara says in Masechet Ta'anit that the way an Avel is comforted is through meat and wine. It's a pasuk. It's a pasuk through yain le'oved nefesh. You should give wine to somebody who is who is in Avelut, and that the ikar halacha is an Avel is allowed to have wine and meat. The minhag in Paras was to be machmir, not to have meat for 7 days. This is also the minhag in Morocco. In many communities in Morocco, they were more machmir because they wanted to show extra avelut. They wanted to pronounce that avelut. Some people even held for 30 days. But the minhag was for 7 days. People refrained from meat. So when you see people doing that, you shouldn't think it's against halacha. It's it's something that other communities had this as well. It doesn't say that. I don't, unless you have a minhag like that. It doesn't say that. My minhag is during Shabbat Chazon, I don't have meat. I don't have meat on Shabbat Chazon. That was the minhag of the cities of Marrakesh that my grandparents came from, and there are sources that justify that because there's no chiyuv to have meat. A vegetarian, what does he do? Somebody is allowed to refrain from meat if they want. There's no mitzvah to have meat. If it's an onek for him, he should have it. But on Shabbat Chazon, that was our personal custom. Many other places in Morocco itself had meat. And I'm not going to tell people what to do, obviously. It's not a simple custom. But if you wouldn't know what the minhag is here, definitely you should have meat on Shabbat. I'm talking about Shabbat Chazon, and Lo Aleinu, nobody should know during Shivat Yimei Avilut as well. Okay. Yes. Right, 7 days, excluding Shabbat. Excluding Shabbat. Okay. Sheva brachot was done even shelo bebet hachatan. This is also a little bit of a misconception because some think that this is the opinion of Maran. It's not simple at all. Maran says that if the whole chabura leaves to another place, Sheva brachot would be said in that other place, and that's not a lack of bet hachatan. And this was the minhag in Paras as well, to make Sheva brachot even shelo bebet hachatan. Rav Yaakov Hillel writes this is the opinion of Maran as well, but there are those who refrain. So in this short shiur that I gave, I'm just going to wrap this up and we'll have some questions. I just wanted to present to you this wonderful revelation that there was proper system of Talmidei Chachamim and Bedin in Paras, and it shouldn't be something that people are mezalzel in, and it should be a source of pride to the Bnei Torah. And what should also be a sense of pride is an allegiance to Masoret and Minhagei Avot, which is such an important thing, because Minhagei Avot defines that a person doesn't just randomly do whatever he picks and whatever he feels like. He goes according to what is Shema beni musar avicha ve'al titosh Torah timecha. If a person denies and rejects and scoffs at what his parents did, what his grandparents did, so basically he's breaking the chain of Har Sinai. And who would say that there's maybe other things are not true as well, Lo Aleinu. One of the Yesodei Adat is Shema beni musar avicha. It's Masoret Avot and Masoret Imahot. And Edut Paras is no less than any other Edut in this, and have to take pride and be choker after their minhagim, as we see that this is just a beginning, this kuntaras. I hope that it spurs, and I know already for a fact there are other Talmidei Chachamim that are working on more extensive works on minhagei Paras and their sources, and although Sfarim weren't printed, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't a tradition from generation to generation to generation. So chas mileaskir, chas v'shalom, for a person to be mizalzel and just not follow masoret avot. It'd be a tragedy. It would be a tragedy, and it's a lack of respect. It's a lack of minagim. We had the honor of having a few weeks ago Hagoner of David Yosef Shlita, and he was very encouraging. That he was speaking about Moroccan minagim in particular. He was very encouraging, and his father was Rav Ovadia was very encouraging that people should follow their minagim. Rav Ovadia Yosef had certain psakim that he felt as a gadol he wanted to change, but the overwhelming psakim if you look at his works, many places he defends minagim and he sources and he encourages. It's not things to be brushed aside. A lot of the things that we spoke about, he didn't agree to. He wanted to change. But this is going to be a question. For example, I know some of his talmidim that follow his works. Besides, when they have a minag, they follow their minag. I mean, these are questions you're going to have to figure out on your own and speak with your own rebbeim how you follow. But I am giving you a information of the minagim that there was in Paras and the importance of keeping minhag. I mean, it's lo yitachen that you do something one way and your parents do something different and your children will do something different. It's not the way Klal Yisrael works. Klal Yisrael works is that you do what your father did and your son will do what you did and your grandson will do what you did as well. So that is the perspective and the importance of keeping minhagei paras. I hope everybody got a benefit from what was said over tonight. Is there any questions? Yes.